December 22nd, 1944. 3:00 p.m. Supreme. Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower stared at a map in a cold stone room in Verdun, France. The situation was catastrophic. Hitler's desperate gamble in the Ardennes had punched a massive hole in American lines. The 101st Airborne Division, some of America's finest soldiers, was completely surrounded at a crossroads town called Bastogne. They were running out of food, running out of medical supplies, running out of ammunition. 4 German divisions were closing in for the kill, and then George S. Patton stood up and made a promise that everyone in the room thought was impossible. "I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours, Patton said. The officers around the table exchanged looks. Some thought he was insane. Patton's Third Army was 100 miles to the south, facing east, engaged in combat against German forces in the Saar region. To relieve Bastogne, he would need to disengage from active combat, wheel his entire army 90 degrees north, move over 100,000 men through freezing weather and icy roads in the middle of winter, and attack into the flank of the German offensive, all in 2 days. It had never been done. Military textbooks said it couldn't be done. The logistics alone were considered impossible. Eisenhower looked at Patton and asked when he could start it. Patton's answer was simple: "As soon as you're through with me." But here's what most people don't know. Patton wasn't being reckless. He wasn't being arrogant. He had already anticipated this moment. 3 days before the meeting in Verdun, when German intentions became clear, Patton had ordered his staff to begin planning 3 different attack scenarios: north, northeast, and due northeast. His logistics officers had already calculated the fuel requirements. His operations staff had already plotted the routes. His signal corps had already established the communication networks. When Eisenhower called that meeting, Patton walked in with the impossible already half completed. The operation that followed would become known as one of the most audacious military movements in modern warfare. And what happened when it was over would define not just Patton's legacy, but America's understanding of what a single commander's will could accomplish. The situation at Bastogne was desperate. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe commanded the surrounded 101st Airborne, along with elements of the 10th Armored Division and various other units that had been swept up in the German advance. In total, about 18,000 American soldiers were trapped in a perimeter roughly 16 miles in circumference. The Germans had cut every road. The weather was too poor for air resupply. Temperatures dropped below zero. Soldiers were developing frostbite. The wounded were dying in makeshift aid stations because there weren't enough medical supplies to treat them. Artillery ammunition was being rationed to a few rounds per gun per day. On December 22nd, the same day Patton made his promise to Eisenhower, 4 German officers approached American lines under a white flag. They carried an ultimatum from General Heinrich von Luttwitz, commander of the 1st Evan Panzer Corps. The message demanded the honorable surrender of the American forces to avoid total annihilation. McAuliffe's response has become legendary. When his aide asked what to tell the Germans, McAuliffe said one word: "Nuts." The official reply sent to the German commander read simply: "To the German commander. Nuts, the American commander. But courage alone wasn't going to save the 101st. They needed relief. They needed it fast. And the only man who could deliver it was already in motion." Patton's Third Army began its turn on December 22nd. The 4th Armored Division, the 26th Infantry Division, and the 80th Infantry Division started moving north. They were disengaging from combat, reorganizing on the move, and advancing into enemy territory simultaneously. Every military manual said this was impossible. The conditions were brutal. Ice covered the roads. Vehicles slid off into ditches and had to be abandoned or pushed back onto the road by hand. Soldiers marched through knee-deep snow. The temperature hovered between 0 and 10 below. Men wrapped their feet in burlap sacks to prevent frostbite. They ate frozen rations because there was no time to stop and heat them. But they kept moving. Patton drove his commanders relentlessly. He appeared at division headquarters, at regimental command posts, even at battalion aid stations. He told his men exactly what was at stake. American soldiers were surrounded and dying. The whole world was watching. and the Third Army was going to do what everyone said couldn't be done. The 4th Armored Division led the advance toward Bastogne. Their commander, Major General Hugh Gaffey, pushed his tankers forward despite losses, despite exhaustion, despite the weather. Combat Command B and Combat Command Reserve attacked along parallel routes, fighting through German roadblocks and ambushes. The fighting was vicious. The Germans knew exactly what the Americans were trying to do, and they threw everything they had into stopping them. Panzer units counterattacked. Infantry dug in at every village and crossroad. Artillery pounded the advancing columns. The 4th Armored lost tanks and men at every turn. But they didn't stop. On December 26th, at 4:45 p.m., the lead elements of the 4th Armored Division's 37th Tank Battalion broke through the German ring at the village of Eisenhower. First Lieutenant Charles Boggess commanded the lead tank. When he reached the American perimeter at Bastogne, he was met by soldiers of the 101st Airborne. "How are you, General?" Boggess reportedly asked when he met McAuliffe. "Gee, I'm mighty glad to see you," McAuliffe replied. The siege of Bastogne was broken. Patton had done the impossible in exactly 4 days. Not the 48 hours he had promised, but the weather had been worse than anyone predicted, and the German resistance had been fiercer than expected. Still, it was the fastest large-scale army movement and pivot in military history. But the battle wasn't over. Breaking through to Bastogne was only the first step. Now Patton had to widen the corridor, hold it against German counterattacks, and eventually drive the enemy back. Over the next 2 weeks, some of the bloodiest fighting of the war took place around Bastogne. The Germans launched repeated attacks trying to cut the corridor. American forces expanded the perimeter yard by yard through frozen forests and shattered villages. Casualties mounted on both sides. The 101st Airborne, finally resupplied and reinforced, fought alongside the Third Army units that had rescued them. The bond forged in those desperate days would last for generations. The screaming eagles of the 101st would never forget the tankers and infantrymen who drove through hell to reach them. When the Battle of the Bulge finally ended in late January 1945, the human cost was staggering. American forces suffered approximately 89,000 casualties, including 19,000 killed. It was the bloodiest single battle in American history. The Germans lost even more, perhaps 100,000 casualties, including 12,000 killed, losses they could not replace. But the strategic victory was complete. Hitler's last gamble had failed. The German army in the West was broken. The road to Berlin was open, and what did Eisenhower declare when it was over? In his official report, Eisenhower called the relief of Bastogne the most brilliant operation of the entire war. He credited Patton's Third Army with saving not just the 101st Airborne, but the entire Allied position in the Ardennes. The rapid pivot and attack had caught the Germans completely off guard and disrupted their entire offensive timetable. But Eisenhower's private comments were even more revealing. To his staff, he admitted that no other commander in any army could have done what Patton did. The speed, the audacity, the sheer force of will required to move an entire army in winter combat conditions was something that belonged to an earlier age of warfare. It was the kind of thing that Frederick the Great or Napoleon might have attempted. But in the mechanized, bureaucratic warfare of the 20th century, it wasn't supposed to be possible. Patton himself was characteristically blunt about his achievement. "The relief of Bastogne is the most brilliant operation we have thus far performed," he wrote in his diary, "and is, in my opinion, the outstanding achievement of this war. But here's what makes the Bastogne relief truly remarkable. Patton had prepared for this moment his entire career. He had studied military history obsessively. He understood that speed and audacity could overcome numerical disadvantages. He had trained his staff to think and plan rapidly. He had built a command culture that valued initiative and aggression. When the crisis came, Patton didn't have to invent a solution. He simply executed the principles he had spent a lifetime learning. The impossible 90-degree turn wasn't impossible at all. It was the logical application of everything Patton believed about warfare. The relief of Bastogne cemented Patton's reputation as America's greatest combat commander of World War II. It also highlighted his greatest flaw. Patton's confidence sometimes crossed into arrogance. His certainty that he could do what others couldn't sometimes led to clashes with superiors and allies. His mouth got him in trouble more than once, costing him commands and nearly ending his career on multiple occasions. But when American soldiers were surrounded and dying, when the situation seemed hopeless, when everyone else was calculating how to minimize the disaster, Patton attacked. He didn't manage the crisis. He didn't mitigate the damage. He won. Decades later, historians still debate Patton's place in the pantheon of military commanders. Was he truly a genius, or was he lucky? Was his aggression a virtue, or a liability? Did his personality problems outweigh his tactical brilliance? But the men of the 101st Airborne never had any doubts. For the rest of their lives, when asked about Patton, the Screaming Eagles would tell the story of Christmas 1944. They would describe the cold, the hunger, the German shells falling day and night. They would remember the moment they heard tank engines in the distance and didn't know if they were American or German. And they would remember the relief when those Shermans broke through with the white star visible on their hulls. Patton rescued them. That was all that mattered. So here's my question for you. Knowing what Patton accomplished at Bastogne, knowing how he prepared for this moment his entire career, do you think military genius is born or made? Could any other commander have done what Patton did, given the same preparation? Or was there something unique about Patton himself that made the impossible possible? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story changed how you understand the Battle of the Bulge, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that reveals what really happened in the wars that shaped our world. Thanks for watching.